Welcome to So and So, brought to you by Bernina, made to create. I'm Meg Goodman, and you're about to enjoy a casual conversation with a special member of the sewist and quilting community. A conversation about how they got started, what inspires them, what excites them, and their connection to this community. Our guest today is Linda Diak of Linda Diak Quilts in Chester, Vermont. Now, Linda only came to quilting about 5 years ago, after a long career as a weaver, sewist, and handcrafter of knitting needles and crochet hooks. Born and raised in Ohio, she left there at 18, and so began a wonderful journey to where she is today. Her journey is one of many twists and turns, which tested her resilience and strengthened her resolve. Through the creation of Grafton Fibers, Diak Craft, and Linda Diak Quilts, her husband Tom has been by her side creating and supporting all along the way. A recent recipient of the Women's Net Amber Grant, she and Tom make their home in beautiful, quintessential Chester, Vermont, sharing their home with 2 of their 3 sons, 2 dogs, and 1 cat. Hi, Linda, and welcome to So and So.
Thank you, Meg.
Quintessential. That just, I love that word. And Vermont, I can almost picture this beautiful town where you all live.
Oh, it is. I mean, we have the village green with the gazebo and the big old inn in the center of it. And
It sounds as though I would picture a quintessential town in Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I have talked before this podcast, and I know you've got some wonderful stories to share with everybody today. But I want to start where we start with everybody on this podcast. How did you learn to sew?
Well, my grandmother was a tailor and a furrier, and she sewed all our clothes as kids, pretty much. And my grandmother taught me to sew. I was not good at sewing as a result of this because my grandmother was so adept. And if I went to her and said, okay, Grandma, what do I do here? Well, let me show you. and you turn around 2 seconds later and whatever it was done.
Uh-huh. How old were you when you learned to sew?
I was little. Very little.
Little.
I mean,
okay.
my mom was a director of nursing at a hospital, and my grandmother, my father was a superintendent in the steel mill, and my grandmother would get picked up every morning and brought over to watch us.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she was always sewing back then. When if not sewing, she was making something. She was definitely a maker.
Uh-huh.
And, we just hung out with Grandma. So, very little.
Do you remember the first thing that you sewed?
No, I don't. And like I said, I blame my grandmother for that.
Blame it on Grandma.
Yeah,
okay.
I blame her because she was, she would grab it from your hands and say, well, here, I'll show you. But
Sure.
She would get into it and finish it. And so I didn't have any attachment to sewing, really. And I didn't sew much again until I had kids. And I was sewing stuffed animals and Halloween costumes and that sort of thing.
Now you grew up in Ohio, and you shared with us that at a very young age you were mentored by Marietta Jones.
Yes.
Would you tell us about Marietta?
Well, as I said, my grandmother was a tailor, and she worked for a tailor and a furrier in downtown Youngstown. And Marietta provided them with fine hand wovens for coating and suit material. And, that's not something you see much anymore these days. And Marietta was also one of the group of women that formed the Shuttle Craft Hand Guild in the 40s and 50s and brought their mission was to bring hand weaving back to America. And she was a prolific weaver and looms on every floor of her house, looms hanging from the ceiling, you name it. And when I was 4, my grandmother, for whatever reason, felt that maybe I was bugging her at the sewing machine. I don't know, but felt that this would be a good thing for me. So Marietta threaded up a little structo loom. There's a little metal 4-harness weaving loom with lily thread, which I don't think you can get anymore. It would be about a 30 weight thread, and taught me to weave overshot. And I've been indebted to Marietta my entire life for not only teaching me to weave, but demonstrating that we often dumb down our crafts for children.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we think that they need to be introduced for weaving, for example, on a really basic loom, when children are very adept learners. And it's the adults that actually struggle more than the children. And she gave me a foundation in weaving that, and from the very start, that I don't think I could have gotten anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. And that certainly played out later in your life, which we'll talk about. But I want to go back to when you were 18. You left Ohio for Atlanta and began an educational journey that was truly filled with a lot of twists and turns that you maneuvered with great tenacity. Would you share this journey with us?
Well, I started out heading to design school for fashion design. Thank you, Grandma. And the school was brand new, and they were having a lot of bumps that first year too. And to their credit, and from what I understand, they pulled it together and have done quite well. But at the time, it was a less than stellar experience, I guess, and I really couldn't afford it, and my mother couldn't afford it. You know, I didn't want to put that on her for something that was less than what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So I left after a year, not even a year, I think, and I did not return when I was in my 20s and living in Florida. Uh, the University of Miami, Ken Uramura had created a fiber department and chaired it at the University of Miami. So I went down there because I thought, well, you know, I would really like to have a degree in this. I'm good at this. At that point, I'd already woven professionally for a number of years. And so I went down there, and he said, you know, you're beyond what we're teaching here. So if you want to pay $500 credit hour and hang out here and weave, you can. But that's really all I can do for you,
Mm-hmm.
other than inspire me. I loved his work, but so I didn't have I had the income at the time. I didn't have the time to do that, to justify it. And then in my early 30s, I decided I'll go back again, and I thought I was going to go into psychology, and then I decided it would be English, and I started again,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother-in-law became ill, and I withdrew to help her through the end of her life, and that was it.
You
That's
know,
as
it's
far as I got.
well, you kept searching for things, and life eventually took you to founding Grafton Fibers,
Hmm.
which is dedicated to spinning fibers and hand spindles, and this goes back to your childhood when you learned some of this. Now, your husband Tom soon joined you, and he created knitting needles and crochet hooks. And you could see those on your website, and they are stunning. So I ask our listeners to please go to your website, and we'll give them that later on in this program. Now, your company eventually became Diak Craft, as it's known today.
Hmm.
So I'd love it if you would, and this is one of my favorite questions, would you talk about your herd of sheep, 3 guard llamas? I want to know what a guard llama is, 5 dogs, and 1 cat, what it was like to craft the fibers as you created those, and finally the evolution of your company to becoming Diak Craft.
Oh wow, that's a lot of territory.
It's so we'll start here. Talk about your herd of animals.
Well, we uh, back then I belonged to an online community, and there was a gentleman who had sheep in Virginia, who had Lincolns, which are big, big sheep with really long uh, wool, kind of like the poor man's Wensleydale kind of thing,
Hmm.
and great for rug weaving. So for to spin into to wool for rugs. So I was he needed help. He had become ill, and he hadn't been able to take care of these animals. So I said, I'll take some. So he offered me 3 older Lincolns, full grown. I think they were 4 or 5 years old at that point, and 3 Corriedale lambs. And my husband went down there to pick them up. And the Lincolns were way overfed. They were huge, absolutely huge. And they hadn't been shorn in at least 2 years. And Lincolns really need to be shorn every 9 months. And they look like reggae sheep. So my husband brought them home. And shortly after we got them there and settled and got the Lincoln shorn, a woman called and asked me to take on a handful of her elderly sheep and maybe a llama. So we went out and met her, and we said, okay, sure, And next thing we know, 21 sheep, 22 sheep were arriving at our house, and 3 guard
Oh, my.
llamas.
What's a guard llama? Did they protect your sheep herd?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
A single llama only has a llama's only defense is to kick.
Uh-huh.
So a single llama is not suited to guard. They could get harmed themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But the guard llamas that we had were actually a family, a father, a mother, and a daughter. And our barn was at the top of a hill, a small hill down to the pasture. And they would stand at night on that hill, facing in each direction, so with their behinds together and facing out. And the first week they were there, the neighbors told me they heard coyotes crying all the way down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And they never came back. In all the years we had them, they were amazing animals, absolutely amazing. And then as far as the fleece went, I did use the fleece from the Lincolns a bit and the Corriedales. A lot of the other sheep that I acquired were, like I said, elderly, and their fleece was not a spinner's quality, I guess. They were just there for a happy retirement.
And a good one, it sounds like,
yeah,
too.
they had a good life, and
Sure.
we had Angora rabbits for a while, and chickens, and the dogs, and the children, and yeah, it was a lot. It was fun.
What's the process, if you could just take us through this, from shoring one of the sheep to actually crafting the fibers? What do you have to do to get that end product?
Well, the sheep are shorn. The wool is clipped off. I did. I had years where I had a shearer come in, and I had years where I shorn them myself with manual clippers, just because I thought I could, and I did. And then the fleece is picked clean of any. It's called skirted. So any bits and dangles, any grass and mud and what have you, matter is removed,
Mm-hmm.
and then it has to be washed and soaked in very hot water to get a lot of the lanolin out of it, and as well as all the dirt. Um, and then once it's cleaned, it gets picked either by hand or with a picker, which is like a bed of nails with another bed of nails that separates the fiber.
Mm.
And then once you've picked it, you can card it. And I had an electric carder that I could card a single type of wool. I could, mix colors together. I could mix different fibers in. So the carding is all these tiny wires. It's like 2 wire brushes, but they were on rotary drums, and it pulls and straightens the fibers, from one another,
Mm-hmm.
and makes them nice and smooth. And so I do that. And then you spin either on a wheel or a spindle. And then depending on what you're doing with the yarn, you can then ply it, which means if you spun it in one direction, you take those 2 singles and spin them back in the other, and that's how you get a plied yarn.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're good to go. You have yarn.
How long does that take, Linda?
It's a process, and you're going to spend a day or two shearing your flock. You're going to spend if you were going to wash all the fleeces, it would take you, depending on the facility you have, it could take you anywhere from a few days to a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
The picking, again, you can pick a fleece in a couple hours. You could card one up in a couple hours. And then spinning depends on how much you're doing, but again, you have a few more hours. You'll see at festivals, often there are sheep to shawl competitions where they start out with the fleece,
Mm-hmm.
and a group of fiber workers get together, and together they clean, card, spin, and weave a shawl.
Mm.
It's pretty cool.
It sounds cool. Now, I want to talk about the evolution of your company, which was originally Grafton Fibers and became Diak Craft.
Well, I had, but the original impetus behind Grafton Fibers, I had designed several small looms because I was a weaver.
Mm-hmm.
And along the way, my children were very young. They were, and the youngest in particular was doing things like cutting the warp threads and coloring on my weaving. So a friend taught me to spin over the phone, actually, and
Over
it
the
kind
phone,
yeah.
somebody, oh my.
She's in Indiana, and it started on as an online conversation, and then over the phone she taught me to spin, and I fell in love with it. So I got a wholesale account to buy fiber, and I started selling the fiber, and I started selling other people's spindles. And then I had an idea for a spindle, and none of the makers that I sold would make it.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom had given me a lathe. Once upon a time, I was a woodcarver's apprentice. So he had given me a lathe for Christmas, and I was always too tired to use it. I had all these little kids, I was exhausted at night. So he started using it and making the spindle, and that was the start of his turning. And he became very adept at spindle making. He made beautiful spindles. And then he decided one day, in honor of his mother, he wanted to turn a crochet hook.
Mm-hmm.
And his hooks grew and developed. He worked with a lot of people, artists and designers in the industry, to understand the best type of hook head, handle, etc. And then the needles came from that. And we were gearing up. We had become even wholesale only. We were being distributed at that point, and then we were copied. And unfortunately, they copied us in a way not to just be another company out there making these things, but to put us out of business. That was their goal, and they almost did.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, there was a lot that happened in between, but we came back. We hung in there. We did lose our farm in the process, and our home, but friends stepped in and helped us get going again. And at this point, we're no longer in Grafton, Vermont, so we felt we needed a new name. And I was no longer making fibers at that point because the focus had been on the needles and the hooks. And so well, I guess I was making fiber, but we were more focused on the hooks and needles at that point. So we wanted something that was a little more generic. So we went with Diak Craft.
And still a very successful company today,
We're hanging in there.
offering some beautiful pieces. So you went from spinning and weaving and Diak Craft, and then you started creating art quilts. How did that happen?
Well, my mother passed away, and after she did, I spent about 2 months going back and forth to Ohio at the end of her life, and I guess I was just exhausted. The previous 10 years, we had ended up in trademark court for 4 years. We had, you know, come to close to losing everything. We'd lost. It was just a lot. And it was culminated in the death of my mom. And afterwards, I felt pretty lost, and I felt I needed to do something again. I hadn't been creating anything. I'd been creating websites and emails and advertisements, but I hadn't been making anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the first avenue I thought to go to beyond weaving was maybe I would sew really fine bags for knitters. because they do love their knitting bags.
Mm-hmm.
And that led me to get my first Bernina because I needed a machine that had a free arm that could, do a buttonhole, etc. And that led me into the quilt shops. Up till that point, uh, I had been sewing cases for the needles, but on an industrial type machine, and and buying my fabrics wholesale. So that led me into the quilt shops, and I started quilting. The one shop had a general manager, Judith, who would nudge me every week that I went in there. You ready? You ready?
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, I did.
What are some of the subjects of your art quilts? How do you come up with what you're going to create?
Most of them are animals.
Mm-hmm.
I love animals, and I think that they are more approachable for the public as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
That people are willing to study the emotion in an animal's face longer than one in a human face. They're more willing to walk up to it, take it in, and absorb the details. Um, so I love animals. I've done a number of people now, and I've also done some buildings, and I'm presently working on my first landscape for a school.
Mm.
Uh, so I'll do whatever, but if I'm left to my own devices, I usually go to the animal.
Do you have a story of maybe a few of your favorite creations?
Oh, I think one of my favorite pieces I've done recently was Bascom Farm. I answered a call for artists last year through Vital Communities. They have a climate farmer program, which was created to help farmers in our region. They provide them with mentoring and I think a stipend or a small grant. I think $3,000 or $4,000 grant, and then they have artists do a painting of their farm, and then they collate this into a calendar. They use it as an art show to tour around the state to educate the public about the needs of farmers in our climate and our changing climate. So I was chosen by the Bascoms because Mrs. Bascom is a quilter.
Ah, nice connection. Mm-hmm.
So she said, I want her to do mine. So I went out there, and my instruction from the committee or the folks running the Vital Communities piece was that I was to find what uh, they were doing uh, to be sustainable. How are they handling the climate, et cetera? And I posed that question to Donna Bascom. I said, what do you think is the most important element here, for sustainability? And she looked at me and she said, a sense of humor.
Unexpected answer.
Yeah. So, so that's how her quote came out. I was supposed to convey what they did. I had to put them in the quilt and convey what they did and convey this element that they use for survival in this climate. And we decided to go with, her Dean is holding their lambs because they have lambs, they have mushrooms, which are in front of them, and then they're vegetable growers. So we gave her a Carmen Miranda headdress of vegetables.
Beautiful.
It came out really nice.
It sounds pretty amazing. Now, you've shared a story that about 5 years ago, while you were shopping for fabric, you've alluded this to, you just happened to sit down in a long arm. And I'm going to quote you here. You said, "It took seconds to know that quilting would be the next chapter in my life."
Oh, yeah.
What was it about that experience that gave you such clarity?
It was like weaving. For me, weaving, one of the things that kept me at the loom year after year was laying down a shot of color, a line of color next to another line of color. And it never ceased entrancing me. And uh, I sat down at this machine. I was at the Water Wheel quilt shop in Londonderry, Vermont. And Andrew, the owner, they just gotten this Q20 in. And I sat down at it, and as soon as it started, it's like, oh, I've got line, I've got color, I've got everything
That's
I wanted.
perfect.
This is perfect. And I'm actually, I can weave the lines, I can, interplay with the woven fabric. It was just, it was everything that I needed.
And you've just gone on from there to
Yeah,
create some remarkable pieces.
thank you.
There is a story, Linda, about an event at the Rutland Plywood Company that greatly affected you and your business. Would you share that story with us?
Well, the wood we used in our needles was diamond wood. It was a dyed, laminated U.S. birch plywood, and it was made by Rutland Plywood. When we started, we used a number, in the early 2000s, we used a number of different companies' laminates. But Rutland Plywood had such incredible presses for the wood, and were at it so long, they pretty much knocked everyone else producing it out of business or out of that business.
Mm-hmm.
So we were reliant on Rutland Plywood, as was the company that copied us.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, they were too. And in fact, the company in India that they would ship the wood to bought into Rutland Plywood at one point. And on one day in August, I had just gotten to the house. I had had my children visiting my parents in Ohio, and I just got home, and I turned on the radio, and Rutland Plywood was burning.
Mm.
And we were the first ones, I think, in the wood turning, whatever, of the users of Rutland Plywood in that industry to know, because it's 45 minutes down the road from us. So I called my husband. I said, turn on the radio. And it was devastating. We had several colors that they would put together for us that I designed, the combinations. And one of our most popular ones was autumn. And our full order of autumn had just been completed and was on the dock waiting for me to
Mm.
get home and get up there and get it.
Mm-hmm.
So that went up in smoke. And so then there was a gentleman in out west or Midwest who supplied turning blanks to wood turners. And so he would take diamond wood and set it up in thicker blocks. And we used some of that for some of our products. And Tom called him and said, Rutland Plywood's on fire. And he said, that's it. I'm done with that, making
Mm.
blanks. That was only part of his business. He said, all the diamond wood that's in my shop is yours. So he slowly sold us the diamond wood over the next 3 or 4 years as we could afford to pay for it, because we couldn't begin to buy everything he had all at once.
Mm-hmm.
So he was definitely one of our angels. And then Tom traded over the next year or two. Everybody used diamond wood. Martin guitar, that's what was in their necks. It was used in cooking utensils, handgun stocks.
Mm.
So they would call and say, we heard you had this color. And we'd say, we do, but do you have that color?
Nice. I like
Yeah,
that.
there was a lot of cross industry trading going on for a couple of years there until, other mills got up to speed. But we lost that day. We had to let everybody go. And because we didn't know. Rutland Plywood claimed they would be back in 6 months, and they never came back. So it changed things.
And now you and Tom are the sole creators of your pieces.
Yes, we came home, and we held off because we didn't know, we didn't have a source for new wood. We had a lot of wood, but we didn't have a source for new wood, and we didn't know what was going to happen. So we didn't want to jeopardize anyone else's livelihood again. That was kind of traumatic, and we held off, and before we knew it, it was just us, and we got used to it. We figured out a way to make it work for the two of us. And that's when I had to sew more. I had a seamstress when we had staff, but that's really when I had to sew a lot.
Linda, out of everything you've made, do you have a most favorite creation?
Oh,
It's like a favorite child, right?
yeah. Really, my favorite thing is the thing I just finished making.
Okay.
And I say, I'm never going to sell that one, or I'm never going to let anything happen to that one. But then I make the next thing and I kind of feel the same way.
Okay.
It's just you pour so much into a piece, and you have so much goes in. That's one of the things about quilting that's even stronger with quilting than it is with weaving. You cannot, when you're quilting, not the piecing part or the fusing part or whatever so much, but when you're actually running a long arm, you can't hold negative thoughts in your head.
Hmm.
You have to make constant decisions, left, right, around, over. Is this working? It's not working. And so everything drifts away, and it's just a nicer, calmer part of you that goes into all your work.
I like that.
So when I'm done, it's my favorite. Yeah.
I like that. Now, you just won an Amber grant from Women's Net, and this is a big deal. Tell us about that.
The Amber Grant is given each month. And now this year they're starting 3 of them a month. They give out $30,000 a month, 10,000 to an existing business, 10,000 to a startup or an idea. You don't even have to have a business yet, and 10,000 to a nonprofit. And it began, I believe, in the late 90s. A young woman named Amber, who wanted to be an entrepreneur, uh, lost her life at a young age, 19, I think. And so her mother began this in her memory, and this group of women took it over and expanded it and made it what it is today. And then annually, they give away, of the previous year's winners, they give away another 25,000 to each of those categories. It's a wonderful group of very supportive people who just really want to see women succeed. They have no other agenda. And the application is 2 questions. What are you doing, or what do you want to do? And if you win the money, what will you do with it?
Hmm.
It couldn't be more straightforward.
And what was your answer to that last question?
Well, for the $10,000, because I had to answer for 10, and then what if you won the whole thing? And for the $10,000 answer, I have 2 pieces, large pieces I want to produce. And I've been waiting to produce them. One is the cows of Billings Farm up in Woodstock, Vermont, and one is Road Trip, which is a collection of animals in a vintage car. And the animals represent the animals that got loose during the flooding in Vermont last summer.
Oh, uh-huh. We'll look forward to seeing those.
Yes, thank you. I'm trying to get projects done in my studio so that I can focus on Road Trip.
Linda, you've got a lot of things that you do. What inspires you?
Oh, well, color and line excite me. I get inspired by nature. I get, animals in particular. And with quilting, I'd have to say there's absolutely other people's work have inspired me a great deal. The very first quilt show I went to was Vermont Quilt Festival in 2018, I think. I wasn't quilting yet. I had never quilted anything yet at that point. And we walked around, my husband and I, and the quilts were beautiful, but most of the quilts, the quilting had no relationship to the quilt, to what was the image on the quilt or the pattern or whatever. It was just done like an afterthought, like, oh yeah, we have to do this part too now.
Hmm.
and, and then I didn't know there was, about art quilts or anything. And I turned a corner and there was a piece by Birgit Schuler of Germany. It's called a Sprinter. And it's all a picture of the evolution of man, as well as getting up and then running, done in relief and stitching. Oh, it's beautiful. And I was like, oh, you can do that. you can do that with it. And a year later, I went to MQX, and I still wasn't quilting. And Christina Arsenegui had a piece there. It was over in New Hampshire. And it was a forest scene that she had translated a drawing, a Joanna Basford drawing. And it was incredible. And I actually came home and started a conversation not too long after that with Christina online.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we've become friends. She's come over a couple of times. So there's been people like that all along, that their work, gives you an idea like, oh, I could, that would work if you did this. And I just like building on things that way too. Robin Cuthbertson, she's another one. Her trapunto work is brilliant.
On your website, there is a photo of you doing some work, and in the background on the wall of the room that you're in
Mm.
is a picture of your mother in her nurse's uniform. Linda, tell us about your mom and the influence she had on you.
My mom was one of the most intelligent people I've ever known, quite frankly. And she was director of nursing. She ended up being director of nursing for two hospitals at the same time, North and South Side in Youngstown. And she was very pragmatic, common sense, no nonsense uh, person. And I guess, she definitely instilled, I think, in all of us a very strong sense of self and independence.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't want me. She was furious that they wanted me to learn typing when I was in high school. It was a required course. And
Sure.
she said, "You do not want to learn how to type." And I was like, "Why, Mom?" She said, "Because if once you learn how to type, you'll spend your life typing for other men." And,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, "But it's required." She said, "So just don't pay attention."
Oh, I love that. That's great. Now, there's also a beautiful story about your father's influence on you as well. Would you share that with us?
My father was very much an artist, always. It's not what he did for a living, but in fact, he was offered at, I think, 18 or 19 years old to be the cartoonist for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which was a huge deal back then.
Mm-hmm.
And his mother saw the offer in the mail before he did, and she threw it away
Mm.
because she didn't feel he could make any money at that.
Oops.
Oops, yeah. And anyway, he always was, and he always encouraged our artistic endeavors, and as did my mom. But my father passed a couple years after my mom, and I had started quilting by then, and one of the last things he said to my sister before he passed away was, "Make sure, tell Linda to keep on quilting."
Mm-hmm.
So I have.
Indeed, you have wonderful, wonderful influence and support from both of your parents. And on the subject of support, you're involved with Vines Rescue. That's VINES, and you support their efforts. Tell us about this rescue group and how you support them.
Well, I'm not. First of all, it's Vine, VINE, which stands
Okay,
for that stands for veganism is the next evolution.
okay.
Yeah, and it is an LGBTQ founded and run sanctuary for farm animals. They have over 500 animals that they care for.
Mm-hmm.
I am not involved with them. Um, During the flooding, one of their animals, Tiki, the emu, got loose. And Tiki ended up going on a month long giant circle
Oh my.
through the region because llamas can really, or emus rather, can really run. So anytime Tiki'd get spotted, he'd take off running. Uh, and and then there was a pig that got loose, a bull, and then in the area also a peacock named Kevin went on the lamb. And uh, I just, as I was reading the local groups and seeing that, I said, wait, there's something here. And I said something in my personal Facebook page, and one of my friends said, that's a quilt.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, yeah. And another one said they need to go on a road trip. So I put them all in a car, and I felt that I should use, once I get this piece made, I would like to use it to raise money for Vine.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because, Tiki was the impetus behind this. And so this winter for Christmas, we had the cards of quilts that I've done that are birds, we had them made into cards or printed on cards and sold those with, a portion going to Vine. And I've told Patrice, the founder, that I'm hopeful that if I get this quilt built and get it photographed professionally, and that they can use it to sell prints, they can use it in their marketing, and I hope to get the quilt shown around the region so that people, it gives people something fun to look at, but hopefully they'll read about it and understand that this represents that the animals were really harmed by the flooding as well, and the people who care for those animals, whether it's a sanctuary like Vine or the farmer or the shepherd or whatever, weather impacts animals immensely, and those are often the last folks the people taking care of those animals are the last ones to get the funding, if they ever get the funding they need to recover from climatic events,
Mm-hmm.
so climate events. So I'm hoping I can do that for them as well.
We'll make sure to include their website on our website in the show notes so people can find them if they want to know more. Linda, what's next for you? What's your dream?
I just want to make things. I really do. I am trying to figure out a best path forward, but really I just really enjoy making things and having an idea and having come to life and then moving on to the next one. I love that. I'm living the dream.
and creating your next favorite piece.
Uh-huh.
In our conversation today, is there any question I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
Can't think of anything, Meg.
Well, we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
And the theme of resilience and learning and is just remarkable, Linda. And I know you're going to be an inspiration to so many who have joined us for this today. I've really enjoyed this, and I want to thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.
If our listeners would like to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm available on through my website, lindadiakquilts.com. My email is linda@lindadiakquilts.com. And you can find me on Facebook and Instagram also under Linda Diak Quilts.
Excellent. Linda, thank you again.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Well, there you have it. Another story about someone just like you, someone for whom sewing and quilting is so much more than a hobby. It's a way of life and a connection to something bigger. If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to meg@soandsopodcast.com or complete the form on our website. Be sure to subscribe to, review, and rate this podcast on your favorite platform, and visit our website, soandsopodcast.com, for information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I want to thank Bernina for making this program possible. I'm Meg Goodman, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.